Hey everybody, Elijah Anderson again, and I'm back with another new movie review. This time it's for Quentin Tarantino's new film, Once Upon a Time in Hollywood. And before we get into the nitty gritty, I want to put a little disclaimer at the front of this. I am not a huge Quentin Tarantino person. I have never watched a Quentin Tarantino film from start to finish. I've only seen bits and pieces of certain films like Django Unchained and Pulp Fiction and even a little bit of Inglourious Bastards, but I've never watched a Tarantino movie from start to finish. And it's not like I have any ill will against the guy. I've just never really watched a lot of his movies, and this is the first movie of his that I've ever watched from start to finish. So, if I make any erroneous claims about the aesthetic or anything like that, just keep that in mind. So, anyway, let's start with a little synopsis of the plot. So, it takes place in sort of an alternate 1969 Hollywood with Leonardo DiCaprio as this Western TV actor named Rick Dalton, who has this best friend stunt double named Cliff Booth, played by Brad Pitt. And it's really all just about them as they experience this new industry as the old one is dying out and new Hollywood is starting to come in, because this is 1969. And for those of you film history buffs out there, this was around the time when the old Hollywood studio system was starting to die down and the new auteur driven Hollywood was starting to take shape. And it's all set against the backdrop of the infamous Manson family murders of Sharon Tate, played by Margot Robbie, and that's about all of the plot that I will give away. So, the first two acts of this movie, or I should say the first act and a half, I wasn't really feeling it, mostly because I felt that there were a lot of scenes that just kind of dragged on past the point where they were starting to overstay their welcome. And not that it was annoying or anything, I just thought that they focused on certain things a little bit too long. And another thing is that I appreciate a lot of the references in this movie, where they make a lot of references to 60s Hollywood TV and Hollywood movie stuff, but I appreciate it more from a historical perspective rather than, oh, I was actually there, so I remember all this. I mean, my parents have definitely talked a lot about that era because they were around at that time, but again, I was born in 95, so I'm very far removed from that. Um, I, I that's why I say I think people from that era or fans of that era will definitely appreciate this movie a little bit more, but I could be wrong. But so for me, where the movie started to really get interesting was at the sort of the end or the middle of Act Two, where there's the scene where Brad Pitt is driving this young hippie girl to a movie ranch where he used to shoot a lot of westerns, and that is where the Manson family is housed. And it is appropriately tense, and we get to see Dakota Fanning in a very creepy role. In fact, I really hope Dakota Fanning gets a lot more horror roles after this, because she is appropriately creepy in this scene. And we see Bruce Dern as the owner of the ranch, and I won't give away much more than that, but yeah, it's a tense scene. It's also really funny, and uh, it's also a little cathartic in a certain way. And so, yeah, I was starting to get interested, but I wasn't too on board. And so then we get to the third act. I have no words to describe that third act. I mean, all I can really say is that if you know the real story of Sharon Tate and the other people who got murdered with her along by the Manson family, it does not go the direction that you think it's going to go. And that's about all I can say. The direction it actually goes is crazy, and it is bonkers, and it's a little cartoony, but it's also a little cathartic in a certain way. And that's pretty much all I can say without giving away too much. I probably spoiled a little too much by saying right then and there, but this really elevated the movie for me. It made that prior 2 hours just totally worth it. But other than that, there's a lot of technical stuff to appreciate too. Robert Richardson is behind the camera as the director of photography again, and there's not really an orchestral score this time around. Again, as is typical sort of with a Tarantino movie, it's more songs from the late 60s and around that time period, with a few little cues here and there, but nothing really where a composer gets a credit. And so I'm having a hard time sort of describing my feelings on the movie, because like I said, that first act and a half just kind of drags, but the ending of Act 2 and the third act is just so awesome that it just sort of elevates it all for me. I just may have to outright see it again, not so I can re-review it, but just so I can gain a deeper appreciation for it. Because, yeah, like I said, that third act is totally worth it. That might have been one of the best scenes I've ever seen in 2019. So overall, I'd say it's a pretty dang good movie with a heck of an ending. I mean, seriously, go see it and you'll see what I'm talking about. So that's all I have to say for Once Upon a Time in Hollywood, and I will hopefully see you next week with a review of Hobbs and Shaw. Take care.